Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today to our Gardening Unplugged. We're going to talk about one of my favorite genera of plants, and that is the genus Baptisia. Baptisia is a solely North American native plant. It's in the family of peanuts and anything that we know of peas, anything in the pea family. So it is a legume. We know legumes are very famous for their ability to be able to fix nitrogen, to pull nitrogen out of the soil. So Baptisias are great in that regard. I got interested in Baptisias many years ago because I tried to grow these. These are lupines. And lupines, most lupines are very difficult to grow here in North Carolina. They actually have a couple of native ones, but the ones you see in the catalogs are real fancy. Those are European and don't grow well. So after failing many times with lupines, I said, well, what else can we grow that might be close to a lupine? And the answer was Baptisias. So these are really very close cousins. Baptisias are much larger flowered, much more spectacular, and much longer lived in the garden. So I don't know why people would grow a lupine when you could grow a Baptisia. So that's sort of where my love of the genus began. Baptisia is comprised of 18 species, spread primarily across the eastern half of the United States. They run from Canada all the way down to the Mexican border. In the wild, the colors go anywhere from blue to white to yellow. Years ago, back in probably '94, I got really interested because I had read a paper from University of Texas, from the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, about all these natural bicolors where the species had come together and had hybridized. And that began a first trip to collect Baptisias down in the Texas-Oklahoma region, where a lot of these hybrids had originated. What happened when we got down there, we found out that the hybrids had all originated in what was now fence rows in farm fields, because Baptisias are not eaten by livestock. So the farmers actually would spray them to get them out of their fields, but they would grow along the fields, the edge rows and in the fences. Well, it turns out all these amazing bicolor hybrids, the farmers got tired of them being in the fence rows and they had sprayed them all with Roundup. So when we got there in the mid-90s, all these fancy hybrids had actually disappeared. And so we basically knew what was possible in terms of a breeding program, but we had to start from scratch. So we went out, we gathered seed, we gathered cuttings, and then over the last 30 years, we've been trying to recreate some of these amazing plants that actually happened in the wild. Now, I'd hope today to be able to show you a lot in flower, not as much because we've had a week of 90s. And like everything else, the flowers don't last nearly as long. If you'd been here last week, the Baptisias were absolutely spectacular. So we're going to walk a little further today to be able to show you. Almost all of the yellows come from this species. This is called Baptisia spherocarpa. Spherocarpa means round seed. And if you look at it, it looks like a marble. Turns green, then it turns brown. Then you can grow that from seed. As long as the Baptisias are isolated from each other, that means out of the range of bees, they will come true. When they're not, they're incredibly promiscuous. So anything that has a yellow color in it came from this original species. This is actually one of our wild collections from just north of Dallas. If you look at something like this last week was incredible. This is probably the closest to red. This is our cherry pie. And this is the full size of Baptisias. They come out of the ground generally, depending on the species, around mid-March to mid-April, depending on where they're from. If you get northern genetics from Minnesota, they don't come out of the ground here until mid-June. So you can have a very long, almost a 3-month range of Baptisias. This is the neat thing about Baptisias. When they're in bloom, your attention is drawn right to them. When they're not in bloom, they disappear. They become effectively a green shrub, even though they do die back to the ground. The real beauty of Baptisias is their tolerance. They are incredibly tolerant to both drought as well as to wet. They will grow with cactus, happy as a clam. First time I collected them in Texas, they had had 40 days in a row over 100. They had had no rain for 6 months. The Baptisias looked great. That's a tough plant. Baptisias will also grow as a marginal aquatic. When I was in Oklahoma, I was shocked to see them growing in the bar ditches full of water. And I was like, well, that may be pretty incredible. And so we have these planted, you'll see later, down by our aquatic garden. They're actually growing in standing water. And they stay in that 12 months out of the year, and they're fine. So there are very few plants that have the incredible durability of Baptisias. Yes?
Tony, are the seeds viable? Like,
Seed are incredibly viable, yes.
And what is the best practice for kind of spreading your seeds about?
Great question. Okay, so for us, we don't want the seed because we have selected these colors, and the colors you will get will be all over the map. A few really good ones, most of them sort of muddy colors. But if you want the seed, once you gather them, they will turn brown or black.
And they sound like a rattle.
They sound like a rattle. They're great. And they start to open. And then if you've got a gravelly area, just let them fall on the ground. They will come up there, and then you can move them. You can sow them in pots. They will come up almost immediately in pots. I would tell you to gather the seed if you want to keep them in a refrigerator, and then you can sow them for the next couple of years and they'll come up. They have really good viability. And they will grow fast. You can grow a Baptisia to flower in 1 to 2 years.
And do they need to be cold before they germinate?
They don't have to be cold, but they benefit. We see better germination when we refrigerate them for about 3 months.
Okay, thank you.
Like a lot of seeds?
Sorry.
Yes, all seed, you can keep them fresher if you refrigerate them. There are a few seed of certain plants that need to be sown within 2 days of gathering them. If you don't, those are dead. Things like, well, hello. This is Kit Kat. This is my associate. Like trilliums, they must be sowed within 2 days of gathering or they're worthless. Hellebores must be sown very fast. Some plants require a cold, dry period. Some plants require a cold, wet period. It really depends on where they're from. But Baptisia is much better germination if you just throw them in the fridge dry and then take them out 6 months later.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so let's walk and look at some more.
Beauty berry seeds.
I think they do best when they're cold, and they will come up the following spring.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to get those up early. This is probably the finest species of Baptisia. This is Baptisia minor. This is a lot of people, the most common species of blue Baptisia is Australis. Australis to me is too big and blousy for the size of the plant. This is a much more refined Baptisia. This is native Oklahoma, a little bit into Alabama, a little bit into Texas, and Durham, North Carolina. So we have a very unusual disjunct population, sort of means it got left behind years ago in Durham. But Baptisia minor has the largest flowers of any, and a much narrower, more compact plant than something like Australis. Australis would be more than 2.5 times that big in terms of size. So there are times and places for that, but when we're breeding, we tend to use minor instead of Australis. One of the very interesting but almost never grown species is Baptisia tinctora. So this is a natural hybrid with Baptisia tinctora from near Wilmington. Tinctora is a fascinating plant. It's later flowering. It's very thin. It's very airy and very open. Where the others are sort of big and bulky, this is the exact opposite. So as a designer, when I want something a little lighter, I tend to work with Baptisia tinctora. This had crossed in the wild with, I believe, if I remember right, Baptisia cinerea, which is a little very small plant. But this is one, I don't think we've introduced this yet. This is probably one that will come in future years. Another interesting type of Baptisias is this. This is Baptisia nuttallina. So this is a species from Louisiana primarily. And whereas this has terminal spikes, this doesn't have any terminal spikes. This has axillary flowers. So it will form a flower in every single leaf axil, one flower. It's an odd plant. It's actually rather attractive, but it's definitely different from any of the other Baptisias that we grow. It's another one that's just finished. This is a really interesting from breeding. We've been able to get it where it's a bicolor flower, where the flower is open white and then aged to blue. So there's one on the market like right now called Lunar Eclipse, which has that trait, which is pretty neat, pretty unusual.
Tony, I know that it's probably a very complicated process, but how do you, in more simple and quick terms, do your cross-pollinating?
With Baptisias, it's actually very simple for us. We plant the two beside each other and let the bees do their thing.
Okay, all right.
You can actually cross. Baptisias are extremely difficult to hand pollinate. They're designed for insects, so it's sort of like a snapdragon flower that you actually have to go in. It'll do the same thing as snapdragons.
Oh, yeah.
And so you go in, you see the pollen in there.
Yeah.
So you would actually go in if you wanted to try to hand make them and let me pull all this off so we can get to the...
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yep, so right in the middle is the stigma.
Oh, yeah.
So you just take the pollen off those and put it on there.
Oh, wow.
So it actually can be done. It's very tedious.
Yeah.
But the bees do an absolute great job. The bees love Baptisias. So this again, this is one of this is Royal Candles. This is one of our earlier introductions. Again, if you were here last week, most spectacular thing in the garden. But as it ages, again, your eyes go to something different, which is what we like about the genus. So we're going to walk over now to our breeding field, which is not far away. We tend to focus, there's two ways to breed Baptisias. One is so that they have foliage to the ground. We actually do the opposite. We like legs. We like to see its naked legs because then you can plant stuff underneath as we've done here. So that gives us more planting room, and we think as a garden designer, that is much more interesting to me than having the same foliage all the way to the ground. So we bred things with very tall stalks. Here we do all of our seedlings, all of our selections. So what you see in here is everything that's new is probably a 2024. So a lot of these were just planted. But to give you an idea, some of the things that are potential, we've been working for years on yellow foliage Baptisias. The challenge is we've got the colors good, but we can't get the flower spikes and the yellow foliage. So that's been a difficulty. We got great yellow foliage, but just not happy with where the flowers are. But you can see the difference, and you can walk up in here. We're trying to work with some more compact ones. This is a really nice one. Again, a little over right now. But you can see what we're talking about with later flowering, using the genetics we bring in from places like Minnesota to have things that while the others have gone out, these are still coming into bloom.
And did you cut lower branches there to show legs, or just?
No, we just breed it that way.
Breed it that way.
Yeah, so we go in the wild and we find those that have that, and then we use those for breeding. Like you can see back there how all the legs show.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just a matter of how you select and what genetics you use. But you can see some of our taller ones. This is one we introduced a couple years ago called Lighthouse. So that's more than 6 foot tall. Yeah. So you can really create all kind of neat effects with these. And you can see we talked about the Baptisia tinctor, the real open one, when you can see the one with the tall white spikes back there. In the very back, how open that is.
Yeah.
And so that's using those genetics. And this is the same. This has the similar genetics in it. So we think that has an opportunity, again, where you want a softer feel in the garden than to something quite so bulky.
Hey, Tony, do deer like these? I noticed a couple plants nibble down.
Deer don't. We haven't had much of a problem with deer, more rabbits. Yeah, rabbits have been a problem in here. Not saying deer will never get them, because deer will eat darn near anything. But you can see one of the traits that we like are the purple stems, and we've got some. Now the purple doesn't remain in heat very long. That's the big thing. But when they emerge, many of these are just absolutely incredible in terms of purple stems. And that's something we breed and select for. So this is more of the dwarf ones we're looking at up there. You see the lavender, that's our new introduction, lavender candles. So that's what they would have all looked like last week, the earlier ones that are now gone.
Do these babies get flowers the first year or no?
Generally, it's year 2.
Okay.
Some year 3, a few are year 4. But we generally, if we don't get flowers the first 3 years, they pretty much get trashed.
Yeah.
Because we can't keep waiting on them too long. So some of the neat colors that we're working on are really into the reds, the lavenders, the mauves, really, and it takes years of working to get those, because to get reds you have to mix like browns and blues and yellows. It's crazy colors to get reds, but we really think we're getting close on some of these to get even closer to red than our cherry pie. But right now that's the closest to red that you can get.
So you're trying to cross these right now?
Yes, what we will do is we come out here every day and evaluate. And we, first of all, to go through and decide what gets trashed. So everything that gets a red flag, that means gets dug out very soon so that it doesn't cross-pollinate. And then we will decide, all right, well, this one's right beside this. This should give us something interesting. And we put a yellow flag, and that designates which one we keep our seed from. And then we also, on a different part of the property, we have isolation blocks. And there we only put 2 or 3 together, and then there's nothing anywhere near there. And that way we're even more assured that the bees will cross those as we want. But yeah, ideally, if we had more time, we would go out and do hand crosses, but there's just so much labor. But most of ours have been geared toward fairly tall plants. We have a tower series. Now we're working to have more short, working to have more late. Because again, this is not even just barely coming into bloom, where most of the early other ones have long gone. So we like that idea that you can have really 3 months plus of Baptisias in the garden just by how you select. And you can see another late one up there. That one I believe is still unnamed. So we look for really good flower spikes. We look for good separation between the flowers and the foliage, and we look for how close the flowers are together, because that really affects the impact of the Baptisias. And you see there's one with some late genes in it from Minnesota as well. See, that has not even begun to open yet. I think we've introduced now over 20 different Baptisias, so they really are quite amazing, as you can see when you catch them in full bloom. And if we hadn't had 90s, they would just be looking so much better than they even are today.
When you say they die back and come to the ground,
they will actually die to the ground. You do not need to cut them back. They will die, and then the stems will come brittle, and just sometime in January you just come in, just pick up the old stuff and throw it away or leave it there. Many of the Baptisias actually become like tumbleweeds, and I'll show you one in just a second that's sort of really good for that. But you see again how late that's just come out of the ground recently. So we have the first Baptisias for us are flowering generally in early March, and that would be a species called Leucophea that's more of a southern plant. So you really do have this very long. Take a look up here. We're talking about where we're going with colors. And you can see we got this sort of unusual blush pink. And this is still unnamed, but it's one we like for color, because there's really nothing quite like that very mauvey pink. All right, and then let's walk right back up here. Show you one more. This is our Mahonia breeding program.
what is it called?
These are Mahonias.
And what does that mean?
Do you know what barberries are?
Yeah, are
Okay.
they bad, aren't they?
Okay, no, they're not bad. There's one barberry that seeds around in the Midwest, but no, most barberries are great.
Okay.
These are first cousins to barberries.
Oh, all right.
So this is probably one of the more unusual Baptisias. Right here. This is Baptisia perfoliata. It's called the eucalyptus leaf Baptisia.
It looks like you.
It looks very much like eucalyptus. And this is a native to Interstate 20 in South Carolina. It's the only place it grows.
Wow.
So it's fairly rare. When it dries in the fall, it dries this beautiful brown, and it will last in a cut for years.
Oh.
And this one, actually, the whole clump, middle of winter, will break off and be like a tumbleweed. It'll just be rolling through your garden. Baptisia perfoliata, to me, is one of the most fascinating. Perfoliata is one of those interesting Latin root names. Perfoliata means instead of the stem running by the edge of the leaf, it runs right through the middle of the leaf.
Oh, yeah.
So anything you see named perfoliata means that the stem was designed to run through the middle of the leaf.
Wow. And can you root any of these, like just by taking a snip?
Baptisias can be rooted. This particular one is almost impossible. Not impossible, but pretty darn close. The problem with Baptisias is you root them, they'll grow off beautifully all summer, and next year you'll have no plant. Because you have to get the cutting so early that it has to develop large enough eyes underground to come back. So part of our problem is we create these great ones, we'd root them, we'd pot them, and then next spring we got pots of roots, but no plants. So that's why we put in a tissue culture lab, and now we're able to overcome that problem with the lab. But Baptisia rooting is just one of the things that drives nurserymen insane. Because when you've got 1,000 rooted plants and then you come to spring and there's no plant, but you've got great roots, the roots are fabulous. It's sort of hard to ship those to people and have them be happy.
Still be patient.
Yes. Yeah.
Leave them with the following year, would you get anything?
No.
No, they're just dead.
They're gone. No, if they don't form buds that fall that are big enough to break, you have no luck. Any questions?
Do those bloom?
They do. These are very much like the one I showed you up there that was axillary. So this is just getting ready to open. If you look right there, that's the flower. So it doesn't. Oh, here's the blooms getting ready to open.
Oh, yeah.
So they don't form stalks. These are all axillary flowers.
Can you say the name again?
This is Baptisia perfoliata.
Perfoliata.
Yeah, just remember that's the word. Any plant ever you see with the stem running through the middle leaves is the last name perfoliata.
Okay. And are you breeding with this?
We've done some. I didn't show you some. The problem is when you breed with this, you get something intermediate, which actually looks pretty ugly. It's not as attractive as this, and it's not nearly as attractive as those. We're on probably our third generation now. But when you get the spikes back, you lose the leaves. So you can't really we haven't been able to figure out how you get this amazing foliage with spikes. It would be lovely if that were the case. I think maybe once we're allowed to do genetic engineering, then we can do it. Then we can take the gene that forms the spike and put it in and preserve the foliage. But without genetic engineering, that's not going to happen.
But with the genetics, is there something are there any of this type that have spikes? Because I wonder if it's something intrinsic to
There is one. There is one that has short spikes. The problem is it blooms 3 months later.
Yeah, because I wonder if it's just intrinsic to the way that this grows.
This is certainly designed to have axillary flowers, but we know that in the F1 generation, we can overcome the axillary flowers. We get that, but we lose the interesting foliage. And in the F2 generations, we did not get back, what we were hoping was in the F2s, we get back this foliage and the spikes.
Yeah, unless they're linked.
And it's got to be linked to some trait, that we could not uncouple in what we do, exactly. Yeah, that's in breeding. A lot of times you will have traits that are linked together, and that way you don't have the typical what we call Mendelian sorting, where it sorts out. Yeah, the linking is a whole nother level of confusion as a plant breeder. Yeah. I wish it was that simple.
Get a plant genome project going.
Well, CRISPR can do it. I mean, there's no question that we could do that tomorrow with CRISPR, but we're not legally quite allowed to do certain things yet, but it'll happen. Other questions?
Have you tried treating the seeds with colchicine to come up with other variants?
We have not. We don't work with cold seeding just because of the danger. We have done, we've had people do radiation for us.
Okay.
We did come up with some very interesting variegation from radiation. None of it turned out to be stable. We do have a few. If you look right up here, you'll see some of the weird variegates. You see these right here that are variegated. We had several variegates come out through some, I think we used anywhere from 40 to 70 kilorads, but they're not stable enough to be ornamental. They're interesting as a plant nerd, but see, we got crappy spikes on them. And we just haven't been able to, they come 50% true from seed, variegates, but we've just never been able to get one that was good enough to introduce.
Yeah.
So yes, you can screw them up with radiation and things like that. You can do some ploidy shifts with, we find that the herbicide group, the trephylline and surfylane group, basically does the same thing as colchicine, but it's more effective and less toxic. But all we've found so far, we haven't found any benefits from changing the ploidy, other than you make a lot of sterile triploids in your F1s.
Yep.
And that's never great.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
How long from start to finish?
Typically for us, a plant, from the time we put it in, for us 10 years.
10 years?
Yeah. Could we do it? We could probably do it in half that, but I tend to over trial stuff because as a gardener, the worst thing that could happen is you introduce something too soon, it turns out to be a dud. And then somebody say, I got this from them, but that really was a dud, because a lot of plants just aren't trialed very well. And I find that really poor. You know, you'll see things written on labels that give you sizes that are about 1/4 what the plant actually gets. And it's because they did not trial it long enough. So if you go to a box store and you see a label that says this plant matures out at 4x4, multiply it by 4. It's 16 by 16. They're literally that far off on every single plant they sell.
Wow.
So, and it's just for a lack of adequate trialing. Other questions?
Most gardeners think in the course of a year or 6 months, not 10 years.
Yes, and gardeners all have the idea that plants are supposed to be pruned. Plants should never be pruned if you put them in the right place, but people put them in the wrong place because A, they get wrong information, or in some cases, somebody didn't read the information. So yeah, in our world, there are no head shears. There's just no reason for any shrub. That instead of reaching for the head shears, reach for the shovel. Use that one time, and then you never have to reach for the head shears again.
You'll prune them on the bottom, though, to
Put it in the right place.
more space.
No, move it to the right place.
But you've
Yeah,
got things, I sat in on
yeah.
one of your pruning classes.
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
About taking out the old wood and taking it down, not shearing.
Right. That's different, yes. That you do selective pruning. Many times we actually raise the skirt on something. That kind of pruning is fine. But repetitive shearing, that's like having a child and say, you grew too tall, so I'm going to snip your head off. I just don't find that a good idea.
Would I be able to show this to our friends?
Sure, absolutely. Yes,
Thank
yes.
you.
All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you for the interest in the group. If you
Thank you so much.
you can
It was very informative.
you can go to our blog. We have a blog from the gardens, not the stuff from the nursery, but a separate blog from the gardens comes out every day, and we show a lot of these pictures when they are at peak, when sometimes people aren't here, and we talk a lot about it. And in the case of all of our specialty collections, like Baptisias, if you go to jlbg.org, click on specialty collection, you'll see every single species and cultivar Baptisia that exist in the world. And you can see photos and you can compare them and really study them. It's what we call our study galleries. And there's really not another, I don't think there's another botanic garden in the world that does what we do.
Wow.
In terms
So
of that
is your
level of
main
detail.
Focus this area, or are you focused here?
Everywhere. Everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have projects like we have our crinum lily project. We have 450 plus different crinum lilies, and we have we wear a lot of hats at the same time.
Yeah, I'm sure. Wow.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank y'all. Glad y'all could come today. And